Hey all, it's David Ducker coming back at you, and today we're going to be asking a question. We're going to be asking you which weapon should you use for which job. And that is to say that in some RPG systems, every weapon is pretty much the same. They're interchangeable, and that's fine. A Warhammer Fantasy does it like that. In other systems, there's a very slight degree of difference between, for example, a war pick, a crow's bill, compared to a spear, or compared to a mace. There's very slight difference, but not much. And the difference often doesn't line up with the real-world differences between those weapons. So I want to ask you, what do you do in your game, or what systems do you like? Do you like when they line up with the real world, like I do, because it makes sense? Or do you like it when it's completely fantasy, fictional? So I'm going to ask that question. I've already told you I like when they line up with reality, because then you can study history, you can study HEMA, historical European martial arts, and that is interchangeable between all fantasy settings that use those weapons. Or it should be. You know, it's just like how boxing usually has a lot of punches versus Taekwondo has a lot of kicks. But if you look at, if there were a rule set, a martial arts rule set, and it said boxing had a lot of kicks and Taekwondo had a lot of grappling, for example, it wouldn't line up with reality. They're just using the words and maybe some of the forms, but the actual mechanics don't actually give you the feel of boxing or the feel of Taekwondo. And similarly with weapons, different weapons feel different. I mean, not only do they feel different in the hand, but they're designed to do different things. Of course, a lot of those HEMA channels have discussed this. Scala Gladiatoria, Lindy Beige, Scala Grim, all have great channels. I think Scala Gladiatoria has discussed this in the most depth, but they've all mentioned it to some degree. Now, where this especially becomes a problem, I mean, it's one thing if they're all kind of the same, that's fine. They're just glossing over the detail. Or it's one thing if there's a slight differences, but it's really bad when one weapon in the game is clearly superior to another at everything, when in the real world that's not the case, or it's very situational. And it's usually just very situational. So I'm just gonna, let's run it down. What are different weapons good at? What are they designed to do? So spears have the advantage of reach. They have a reach advantage over every other weapon, and you can still use them with a shield very often. So they have that, and that's a huge advantage if you think about it. Now spears also have some ability to punch through armor, although not very much. But their primary attribute is going to be that reach. Then if you look at a pick, picks punch through armor. They damage armor, they destroy armor, they dent it into your flesh. So picks are specifically designed as crowbills to defeat someone with heavy armor on. The disadvantages are that they're very unwieldy, unbalanced, they're harder to use compared to other weapons. Similarly, hammers or maces are also designed to use against armor. Now, they don't specifically punch through the armor, although they can, but their concussive force carries through the armor. So they're less likely to destroy the armor itself, but the concussive force can bruise you internally and still kill you, in fact, even if you're wearing heavy armor, plate armor. So that's your bludgeoning implements, your maces and your hammers, and flails as well. Although flails also are harder to use, much harder to use, but they can go around shields and they can wrap weapons to some degree, and they're very unpredictable. Unpredictable for them, but unfortunately unpredictable for you as well. So that's flails. That's how they feel in the real world. That's what they're designed to do in the real world. And then you can come through to, let's look at swords. Swords can't really punch through armor. Compared to a hammer or a pick, they have very little ability to penetrate armor. Late medieval swords started to get some, especially if you got the sword and you grip the blade, and then you can kind of use it like a short spear. So that half swording is what that's called. So you can get some ability to punch through armor or find those gaps in the armor, but not much compared to other weapons. Compared to the hammer where you just have to hit them, so much easier, or compared to a spear even where you have that reach and you still can point with it, or compared to a pick where you just have to hit them and then that'll do the work in a different way than the hammer or a mace. So swords not good against armor in the real world. The advantage of swords is you can wear them on your belt easily. They're a sidearm. You can always have a sword with you, always, at all times. That is their main advantage. They are a backup weapon. And also, of course, if you're unarmored, a sword is more nimble than pretty much any other weapon except maybe a spear. But spears are really hard to carry around with you all the time. So if you're unarmored, a sword is a great choice. You have so much more dexterity with a sword than you do with a pick or an axe or a hammer. You can carry it with you at all times. You're never unarmed. And yeah, at that point, when there's no armor involved, the fact that it's less powerful doesn't matter. So that's swords. And then an axe is going to be like halfway between a sword and a hammer or a pick. An axe can punch through armor. Not as well as a pick or a hammer is going to get around that armor or punch through it, but it can do it. So it's not as weak as a sword in defeating armor, but it's not as powerful either as a hammer or a pick, or a crowbell. So an axe is going to be in there. And then you could even add another category between a sword, a straight sword, and an axe, which is going to be your curved swords. Curved swords are harder to use. They have less balance than a straight sword, generally. But they tend to have more power. So this is a falcata, a khopesh, a scimitar, anything like that. Falchion. So in the real world, I mean, that's basically your weapon categories, and that's what they do well, and somewhat what they do poorly. So swords have great balance, you can keep them on you at all times. That's awesome. Whereas anything else is going to suffer for balance, harder to use, but they can penetrate armor to some greater or lesser extent. But you can't carry them with you all the time. It's just too inconvenient. You can't hook a mace easily onto your belt or an axe or anything else and just wear it 24 hours. And if you want to argue that, you can just look at any kind of historical document, and just the fact that no one did it is pretty good evidence that it's a bad idea. If it were a great idea and it was easy to do, everyone would have done it, but nobody did it. So right there, that's all the evidence that I need to say that it's a bad idea. So that's kind of the difference how they feel in the real world to some degree. Obviously it's very simplified here, but in gaming terms, I rarely see that come forward. I rarely see where picks defeat armor, but they're hard to use, which might be an attack penalty, or where maces have a different way to defeat armor. They go through the armor instead of destroying the armor. Rarely do I see those two separate mechanics together. And also that those degrees of balance, and I think I did a separate video on balance. I might have done one on reach as well, because reach is very important. A mace obviously has very little reach, where a sword would have greater reach. In general, an arming sword would. And of course a spear has even greater reach than that. So reach, balance, and armor penetration or armor shattering ability, to me these are the things you talk about in the real world. So these are the things you should be talking about in a game world as well. And a lot of this, it depends on your system, but it's easy to homebrew in to the game. So if your system doesn't have this, it's generally pretty easy, especially if you've seen some systems that do have it. For example, in Game of Thrones, there's armor penetration, which just ignores armor. So that might be what a mace should have. And then there's armor shattering, which destroys armor. So the armor gets less useful every time you hit the guy. And it has wieldiness or balance. So a flail, for example, gives you a penalty to hit with it. It's hard to hit someone with a flail without hitting yourself. So Game of Thrones has all the tools. They're not put together well, unfortunately. For example, the pick doesn't have armor piercing. It has shattering, and there's just a lot of problems with it. I won't go into it now because I can't remember exactly how it is laid out, but it's not the way it should be, in my opinion, because maces and picks basically do the same thing when in the real world they don't. And also it's tiered in a way that I don't agree with, whereas maces are inferior to everything else, and swords and flails, one-handed flails, are superior to everything else. And then in the middle you've got the crowbill and the axe, and you got the crowbill and the axe, and it doesn't have one-handed hammers at all, which is just silly in my opinion. To leave out a whole weapon category one-handed is terrible oversight. But it has all the tools, so it'll be easy to homebrew them together, and I'm sure I've made a homebrew table to fix that, so it reflects the real world better. So that's kind of my ramble on which weapon for which job. Swords are great because you can keep them on you at all times, and if you're fighting someone without armor, they have a lot of reach and balance. That's great. But if you're fighting someone with armor, the reach and balance don't matter, because when you hit them, it can ignore you if they're wearing plate armor. And then, the far end of that spectrum would be the flail. It's hard to carry a flail around with you. It rattles all over the place. It's oddly weighted. It might be spiky. It's hard to keep something spiky on you at all times. It's unbalanced. It's hard to hit someone with it without hitting yourself with it. It's hard to use, but it can punch through armor fairly well. It delivers concussive, percussive force. It can go in a breastplate or a helmet, and break ribs right through armor, or just knock someone out right through their helmet. So a flail against an armored opponent is amazing if you have time to get that flail, because you can't carry it, so it's either packed away or your squire has it packed away and he can get it for you. But I mean, that's one of the drawbacks of armor in general, is you can't wear armor all the time, and armor takes a while to put on, depending on the style of armor. That'll be greater or lesser again. But the rules should reflect that as well. They should. They often don't. People will wear full plate all the time, and that's a terrible idea. Actually, Scala Gladiatoria has a video on why you should not wear plate armor all the time. He said that he has plate armor, and he's never worn it all day, and he never wants to. And he was quite upset with RPGs that depicted that as being a good, healthy thing to do, is wear armor 24/7. So that's my little ramble. Let me know what you think, how you do it, if you found games that do it well, or feel free to crack jokes against games that just clearly do it poorly. But I'm going to sign out. I wish you good day and good game.